I recently coached a landlord who's been trying to rent a vacant apartment for over 3 months. She's bleeding cash, she's stressed, and she's worried. I've had similar experiences in my 21 years of investing, so I gave her some ideas to fill up her apartment fast. And in this episode, I want to share those same 5 ideas with you so that you can quickly fill up your rental properties with great tenants. Let's get started. Welcome to the podcast, Real Estate Investing with Coach Carson. I'm your host, Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach Carson, and this is a show to help you get out of the financial grind so you can spend your time doing more of what matters. I'm going to jump right in and share 5 reasons my properties haven't rented quickly enough in the past, and then I'm going to give you solutions for how to solve each one of these problems. And the first problem is with the listing itself. So almost every rental property these days is either shown on your website or maybe on a website like Zillow, where people can see more details about your property. And so the first thing I always check if it's not renting yet is, how are my photos? Do I have a video of the property? You know, these days, a picture has always been worth 1,000 words, but having good photos and a good video is just essential. I've seen rental property listings where they have 1 photo or like 3 photos, and it's a really bad camera, or it's out of focus, or it's dark outside. This is a chance to show the best of your property. So double check your photos, double check your video, and then also double check your description. Sometimes the problem is you're just not explaining enough about it. People have questions, and anyone who's going to make a decision to buy something or to rent something, if they're confused about it, they're not going to make a decision. So photos, videos, description, but also check your contact info. Do you have a good phone number, a good email, or some way that people can get in touch with you? I know that sounds kind of obvious, but if you want people to reach out to you, maybe people are seeing the listing, but then they don't have a good way to get in touch with you. So double check all of those. The second reason your rental might not be filling up fast enough is a marketing or a promotion problem. In other words, you're just not getting enough eyeballs on your listing. Quick funny story, this might date me a little bit, but when I first started investing, the main way that you got tenants was you just stick a sign in the yard. I know that sounds kind of old-fashioned, and signs do still work in some cases, but the best way to get more eyeballs on your listing is checking to see, are you promoting them on all of the websites out there? So I've got a list here. I'll just read down. There's probably other ones as well, but you need to be on Zillow. You need to be on apartments.com. Craigslist, even though that's a little old school, a lot of people still find rentals on Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, Apartment List, Zumper, Realtor.com, Nextdoor. A lot of people talk about their neighborhood in Nextdoor, but they also find rentals there. And then if you're doing a midterm rental, most of these have been for long-term rentals. If you're doing a midterm rental, check on Furnished Finder and Airbnb. A lot of people find like 3 to 6 or 9-month rentals if they're already furnished on Furnished Finder or Airbnb. Real quick, I have a free PDF download of this checklist of 5 reasons your property might not be renting. So if you want to follow along with this, take some notes or just print this out to have later to solve your own rental problems, you can get a free copy of that at the link in the podcast or the YouTube description below. Now, if you've double checked your listing and everything's good there, and if you've double checked your marketing and you're putting the word out to as many places as possible, there might be a third problem, which is the house or the apartment itself. So what I mean by this, first of all, is, does your property look appealing to people? Is there curb appeal when you first pull up to the property? Do people say, oh, this looks like a nice place? Or do they say the opposite? They get a bad feeling because the grass is tall, or the bushes are kind of overgrown, or there's trash in the yard. We always have a little thing when I take my kids out to a rental property. It's like we get out of the car and we pick up trash. That's just what you do, because it's just the little things that make it seem cared for, and it shows that you care about your property. So curb appeal is really important. People do judge a book by its cover. People do judge a property by their first impression about how they feel about it. So really focus a lot on curb appeal. Sometimes a small amount of money can go a long way in making your curb appeal better. Also, is it clean? Like, cleaning is, even if your property is older, having it as spick and span clean, smelling good is really important. And then also just look at little repairs. And I would suggest having a third party come to the property, like a friend or somebody else who doesn't have as much interest in this property. Just get their first impressions. Is there something that bothers them about the property? Is there something they notice? And sometimes you can fix things with a little bit of money just to make sure the repairs are good. And just to give you a specific example of my area, if I've had a property that's vacant for at least a couple of weeks, in the southern United States, we have insects, we have bugs. So you might have spiders that crawl out and they just die on the kitchen floor. We have roaches in the south. Even if a house is sprayed and in good shape, Give it enough time, there will be one dead roach. And so those are little things that you just have to go to the property regularly to make sure those kind of things aren't a problem, because that'll turn somebody off. If everything else looks good, that might be the one thing that a tenant decides, I'm going to go look at this other place and not rent this one. Then under the category of house problems, there's one that you really don't have a lot of control over, but I've had this problem before renting one of our properties, and that is the neighbors. So go to your property at different times of the day, different times of the week, and just pay attention to what's going on. For example, I've had a property where you walk into the backyard, which is very nice at our property, but then there's this ferocious dog who jumps up on the fence, and you feel like they're about to jump over the fence and attack you in the next door neighbor's yard. So that could be a huge problem. Now what can you do about that? Not a lot of control you have directly. You could talk to the neighbor, you can see what you could do, but that might indicate to you, oh, that's why my property's not renting. Maybe temporarily I need to lower the rent. Maybe you need to talk your neighbors into moving into another property, all kidding aside, but that is a problem. And there's other reasons your property might not be renting because of the neighborhood, because of the neighbors. So you just want to pay close attention to that. A fourth problem that might be keeping you from renting your property quickly is a people or a management problem. So this could apply whether you manage the property yourself or whether you have a third-party manager. But I would ask questions of yourself like, how are you responding to the leads that you get from interested people who want to rent your property? And what I mean by that is, how long are you taking to respond to people? If people email you on a Thursday evening and it takes you until Saturday to respond to them, you're probably going to lose them. There's a rule of thumb in sales, and that's what leasing is. It's just a form of sales that there's speed to lead. If you get a lead from somebody and they're ready, they're interested in your property or whatever you're trying to sell, you got to respond quickly. And so how quickly are you responding? Are you taking too long? And if so, figure out a way to respond a little bit faster, maybe on your lunch break, or maybe your partner or your spouse can respond, but respond quickly. The other thing is, are you answering your phone? So sometimes just picking up a phone and calling people is an even better way. We get in the habit of texting. I know people, I like to text sometimes too, and email, but if somebody seems like a good lead, just call them back. Answer the phone, call back, talk to somebody that might get them to go look at the property or become a candidate for you very quickly. And then finally, think about your service mentality. How friendly are you? How helpful are you? Because really what we do at its essence is we are a hospitality service business. We have this property that we're going to let somebody live in, and we're lending this property essentially to them to let them live there, but we are serving them. They are a customer. So have that kind of attitude. I don't know how you feel about Chick-fil-A, but it's one of my favorite companies because they have good chicken sandwiches, but also because they started in Hateville, Georgia, which is right near where I went to school, in College Park, Georgia. And I love the attitude of their service at their restaurants. If you walk into a Chick-fil-A, they say, "How may I serve you? How can I help you?" There's just this attitude that they want to help. So I know that sounds like a small thing, but as a landlord, as someone who's leasing your property, having a good attitude, a friendly, helpful attitude, I want to help you. I want you to live in this property. How can I help you? Can go a long way. Now, all of that is feedback in general. Now, if you're the one doing it, you can try to fix that and adjust your own service mentality. But you also need to check these things with your property manager. How are they responding? How are they answering their phone? How are they being friendly and helpful? Or maybe they're being the opposite of friendly and helpful. And the only way you'll know this is maybe to do a little bit of a mystery shopping. So either you can call every once in a while to their leasing hotline, or talk to the person who's doing their leasing, or have a friend, somebody they don't really know, give a call and just be a candidate. Be someone who's interested in your property, record the call, see how they're doing. This is a legitimate way to test out your services, because this is a really important part of getting your property leased. And if you're hiring somebody to do leasing for you, you need to double check and make sure they're doing it in a good way. Now, the fifth problem that might be causing your rental not to rent fast enough is the price of your rental. In other words, how much does your rental cost on a monthly basis? Now, I deliberately put this as the fifth problem because my impulse often, and probably a lot of other landlords, is if your property's not renting, you automatically want to just lower the rent. And that could be a mistake if you haven't looked at 1, 2, 3, and 4, these other problems. If you haven't checked your listing, if you haven't checked the marketing, if there's a problem with the house, if you haven't checked the system, the people, the management of responding, you got to check all those things first. But if you've done all that and you're still not getting it leased fast enough, ultimately the market will tell you what your property is worth. And if you're getting no calls, if you're getting no leases, no applications, then there might be a problem with your rent. That's what the market's telling you. Now, one feedback that I would have for you is that you could just lower the rent, the monthly rent, and sometimes I do that. But in many cases, you could offer some kind of incentive. So maybe you give a half a month rent free, or a full month rent free, or some other kind of promotion. You see a lot of apartment complexes do this in order to keep the rent the same. And there's multiple reasons they would do that. Sometimes the value of an apartment building is dictated by the rents of the building. So they don't want to lower their rents. They'd rather give away a half a month's rent or a month's of rent, and instead of having the rents look like they're lower for the value of their building. Another reason might be if you have rent controls in your area. Sometimes you can only raise rents by a certain amount every month or every year. So that'd be another reason not to lower your rent. But I like to be aggressive, whatever I have to do. If it's been sitting vacant for a couple months, I would rather be aggressive, lose some money on paper in the short run, but have your property full. Like, think about it. If your rent is $1,500 per month and you go another 2 months without having any renter in there, that's $3,000. How much could you give away? How much incentive could you have for people to get it filled up faster and still make financial sense? So be aggressive is my recommendation. Just get the property full. You can always try to raise the rent again later. Another thing to think about with a price problem on your rent is the season that you're trying to rent it in. In my area, it's very difficult to rent properties in November and December. And so if I want to get it full in that season, sometimes I have to do a short-term lease, maybe for 6 months at a lower rent to get back to the normal leasing season of June, July, and August. So seasonality will really affect the prices. So keep that in mind as well. So far, we've gone over the 5 different problems that might be keeping you from renting your property quickly, and I've given you a few ideas on how to solve that, but I want to give you a specific solution, a system that I like to use in my rental business has been very helpful to solve problems. And this is kind of like when you go to the hospital and you have a nurse who you talk to called a triage nurse. They ask you a series of questions, and they're able to pinpoint the likely problem, and then they send you to a specialist to help you solve that problem. Well, this system's a little bit like that, but just for leasing your property. And it's all based on this idea that your leasing process is a funnel or a leasing funnel. Now, I mentioned earlier that leasing is just a form of sales. You're trying to sell your tenant on moving into your rental property. And so I apply something that a lot of salespeople use, which is tracking the different steps of a funnel. Now, it works like this. With a sales funnel, at the top of the funnel is the first step, and at the bottom of the funnel is the final step, the thing you actually want to get. In our case, the final step is the lease or the deposit that you get from your tenant. That's the ultimate goal here. But along the way, there's various steps. So at the very top of the funnel, you get views or impressions. Now, this is very relevant on the internet. You might have heard of like Facebook impressions or social media impressions. You want to know how many times has your listing been viewed by people in the marketplace. And this number is actually going to be the biggest number out of all of the other ones. It's going to be the wide part of the funnel. So you have to have, for example, 1,000 people view your listing in order maybe to have the next step, number 2, to get maybe 10 leads. I don't know if that's the exact number. You're gonna have to look at your local market, but a lead or an inquiry is when somebody looks at your listing and they're like, oh, that looks interesting. Let me press this button on Zillow to send a message and say, I want to go look at it. Or maybe they give you a call, or maybe they send you an email. However it happens, you get a lead from a person when they show their interest. They basically raise their hand and say, I'm interested. This is always going to be a smaller number than the number of views or impressions that you get. And then you go from step number 2 to number 3. So you have an inquiry, somebody messages you. They might just be shopping. They might be asking questions. But if they're really interested in it, then they either want to have a showing if they're in person locally. A lot of people want to go look at the house. Or if they're long distance, it's more common these days, especially after COVID, for people to do maybe a virtual showing or just to ask more questions before they apply for the property. And that's step number 4. They need to go through a step of kind of filtering out to make sure they really like the property before they go to step number 4, which is an application, where they fill out an application, they pay an application fee saying, hey, if you rent it to me, I am ready to rent the property. And there's gonna be fewer applicants than there are showings. And then you finally get to step number 5, which is getting the lease or the deposit. Now you might be saying, Chad, that makes sense, but what's the point of tracking all of that? Well, the point is, this is the triage. This is how you figure out where the problems are. So when I have a rental property that is not filling up quickly, on a weekly basis, I track these 5 things. So whether you have a property manager or whether you do this yourself, every single week, either on a piece of paper or you can do this on a spreadsheet if you want to get a little bit fancier, you want to track, number 1, how many views and impressions did you get? For example, maybe I got 500 impressions on my listing this week. Then you want to say, how many leads and inquiries did I get? How many showings did I have? How many applications did I get? How many leases and deposits did I get? Obviously, if we're not leasing our property, we're getting 0 leases and deposits. But what you do here is you can look at the natural pattern of this and you can study it over time. And you can see that, all right, well, I'm getting 500 impressions, for example, but I'm getting 0 leads. Like, what's up with that? I'm getting a lot of people looking at it, but 0 people are actually raising their hand and saying, I'm interested. So this is how you problem solve. If you see a weird anomaly at one of these steps, you can then go and say, all right, if I'm not getting enough leads, maybe there's a problem with my listing. They like the picture initially, they see that, but then they read the description and something causes them not to click the button. So I'd really put a microscope underneath my listing if I weren't getting enough leads. I would say that's a listing problem. Let me check that out. Let me really look at the pictures. Let me look at everything else. Maybe there's a problem keeping them from getting from step 1 to 2. In the same way, if you're getting like 10 leads or 20 leads, and that's very low compared to other listings, I might want to look at the marketing channels. Maybe I'm not marketing in enough places. Maybe it's a listing problem as well. Maybe the pictures are bad and they're like, I'm just not even going to look at that at all and I'm just not interested. But somehow, some way, if you're not getting enough views or impressions, it tells you, the message to you, the triage message is you need to fix something with your marketing or fix something with your listing. Now let's go a little bit further down the way. Sometimes you get a lot of views, sometimes you get some leads, but you're not getting enough showings. So you're not getting the people who are super interested, who are ready to go out and look at the property. Now, not always, but many times that is a human or a management problem. Now there's a couple of reasons. I remember back when I was self-managing all my properties, it's kind of a pain to show properties. Like if you're working a full-time job and doing this on the side, like somebody calls and they're ready to lease the property and you're not able to go show them. It might be that it just takes you a few days to show the property and that you lose people from that step of lead to showing. So my recommendation there is just to have a system. What I like to do when I'm managing my own properties and leasing them is have a couple of showings per week. You can call it like an open house. And you can say, hey, we're going to be having a showing this Tuesday evening to give people like an evening time and Saturday morning at 10. Now, it does a couple things. If your property is already leased out, it's kind of a pain for your tenant to have to keep the property clean and ready. And so you just give them, hey, 2 times a week for the next few weeks until I get this property rented, I'm going to be showing the property. It's going to be Tuesday from 5 to 6, and it's going to be Saturday morning from 10 to 11. Now, the other benefit of that is if you have other people showing up, other tenants, they're going to see that there's other people interested. It's kind of like an auction mentality. They're like, oh, wow, there's 3 other people wanting to see the property. And that gets a little bit of, competitiveness, FOMO. They realize that, hey, there's other people who want this. They might be more likely to go ahead and apply for the property. So that's my specific system, but you just got to have some process to make showings easy, both for you and for the tenants who are going to look at your property. And now let's talk about what if you don't get enough applications? What if you're getting like 20 showings and you're not getting any applications? That would be a very serious problem, and it'd be obvious that you have some kind of issue with applications. What would be the problem then? I would guess that you would either have a house problem. People are showing up at the house and they're like, oh, it looks good on the listing. The pictures are beautiful, but the house smells. The dog in the backyard's a problem. There's just, it doesn't seem clean, or there doesn't seem repairs. There's some disconnect between the marketing and the advertisement, the listing, and the actual property when they go look at it. So it's very likely a house problem, but it could also be a price problem. It could be, it looks good on paper, on the internet, but they get to the house, and it's just the value is not there. So one of the two could be a house or price problem if you're not getting enough applications. And then finally, if you're getting a lot of applications and showings, I've had this situation before where I get tons of applications, but none of them qualify. So in that case, it could be a couple of things. It could be a screening problem. So maybe your tenant screening criteria are too strict. I've had this in a couple of cases where we had some of our lower price rental properties, let's say like a $500 or $600 per month rental. One of my tenant screening criteria was you had to have 3.5 times the rent and income. For many people in this lower income bracket, that was pretty difficult to do. And so I talked to my mentor, I talked to some other people, and some of them said for those properties, they actually used 3 times the rent, or they were a little bit more flexible on the income to rent ratio. But they're still very strict on the credit and also on the rental references, talking to old landlords to see if this person was a good tenant with the other people. Now, I'm not saying you lower your criteria, because in many cases, your criteria are the number one mistake you make is lowering your criteria and not putting a good tenant in the property. That's the biggest mistakes I've made as a landlord. So my recommendation is if you're having a problem renting the property, other than a tweak here or there, like with the income to rent ratio, just lowering a little bit, I would say keep your tenant screening criteria the same because you want a good tenant, and just lower your price. I would rather lower my price than lower my qualifications for a property. Because if you lower your qualifications, you might on paper get the higher rent, but if they don't pay the rent, if you have a problem, it's going to cost you a lot more money in the end. Now, having said all of that, the main takeaway, the main message I hope you get from this video is that if your property is not renting, if you're stressed, if you're losing money, I get it. That could be a negative situation, but keep calm and carry on. This is a message I heard that they used in England during World War II when citizens were getting bombs dropped on them in the Blitz from the Germans. Things are dangerous. They're stressed, obviously, but keep calm and carry on, Because if you use a system, so if you have that checklist of 5 problems that I shared with you, and you go through each one of those, or if you have a triage process where you can go through those steps of the funnel and say, all right, I think this is where we're really lacking leads, or this is where we're really lacking enough views, you can solve the problem, but you got to keep a calm mind. You can't freak out. You can't start stressing out about it. Have a system, work on it, go through the process. And I promise you, if you do that long enough, eventually you might have to lower the price. You might have to spend a little money to fix or solve a problem. But if you have a residential property in a relatively good location, eventually you will get your property rented. That's one of the best parts about being a small and mighty investor who has houses, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, is that we can get our property rented. But if you own commercial property, like if you own this big box that used to have a Walmart and now Walmart moves out, you might have vacancy for years and years and years. So I want you to have a little bit of hope. If your property's sitting there vacant, you will get it filled up. You're gonna have to do some work to figure out how to solve that problem, but you can get at least, you'll get the rent coming in, you'll learn some lessons, and you can live to see another day as a landlord. So remember, if you want a freebie to help you remember everything we've covered in this episode and apply it to your rental property, I have a free PDF download that you can get if you just look in the podcast or the YouTube description below. The link is coachcarson.com/rent fast. And of course, all of this has been covering one of the most important problems we have as landlords, leasing your property, getting it filled up. But something we didn't cover in this episode is another problem that can cost us a lot of money and a lot of headaches, and that's maintenance. And that's why I want to share my next episode with you, is where I have a conversation with an experienced landlord about how to keep your properties low maintenance to save you a lot of money and a lot of stress. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can click on the thumbnail above me here, or if you're listening on the podcast or watching on YouTube, you can click on the link in the podcast or the YouTube description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.